not everything in marketing can be measured, right? And so I think part of it is like there are these other holistic activities that kind of go on, like podcasts and things like that, that are a little bit trickier to measure. So I think one of the exercises that you kind of have to get alignment around is not everything is going to be measured, but we can all just kind of agree that doing a podcast and putting it out there is good engagement, it's good marketing. And so some of the stuff you just kind of have to have a leap of faith to say, like, I can't directly measure this, but I know podcasts work. I know that we get really good engagement. I know we get good feedback from it. I know our prospects like it. It's when we get it mentioned on sales calls. What's the value of that? I'm not exactly sure. So I think positioning out some of your budget, I think, for those types of activities is a big piece of it, and saying like, this is going to be a little bit unmeasurable.
This is Metrics and Chill, where you'll learn practical strategies to drive consistent and predictable growth. For those of you who are not familiar, this is Metrics and Chill, our podcast, Databox's podcast. We are kicking off a new season and we're doing it live. It's super fun to be able to invite people in for Q&A. This is something I've like kind of toyed with doing for a long time. And I asked Adam to be the guinea pig. Adam's been on the show twice before. His interviews have been in like the top 5 episodes. He always brings a ton of value when he comes. So for one, he's just a great guy. For two, we've always had great conversations in the past. And for 3, I knew he wouldn't really mind being a guinea pig a little bit. So he was gracious and willing to like do the first ever live episode with us here. So there might be some bugs or some kinks that we'll work through, but we appreciate everyone being here. And the sole goal here is like bring you as much value as possible. I want you to walk away with practical, actionable tips and ideas that you can take to improve your marketing programs and ultimately drive revenue and grow your business. So super excited that you are all here. Adam, thanks for being here for the first ever live episode. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to join you again. I think this is the first time I've been on a podcast 3 times, so I'm excited.
Yeah, Adam's always been a guest favorite, so we're happy to have you. I'll say up front too, I think I was thinking about this morning. One of the reasons why I'm really glad it's you covering this topic is for anyone who doesn't follow Adam on LinkedIn, you should go follow him now while we're talking. You can at the end, maybe when we're taking Q&A, drop your LinkedIn in the chat or just search Adam Goyette. But you provide really like nuanced takes. So this is what I like about you. Like, I feel like you're the everyman, like you're like the every person's marketer. Like there's a lot of like sort of cutting edge or like naming stuff and getting fancy around stuff. And your takes are kind of consistently like, yeah, don't overcomplicate it. Like, here's what really works. So I feel like you're really able to distill down to like the core elements. So I'm glad it's you that we're talking about how to build a more profitable marketing program.
Yeah, I won't be inventing any new buzzwords today.
Yeah, no, nothing against buzzwords, but it won't happen.
I have a lot against buzzwords, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So let's get into it. Let's start here. I want to kind of set a scenario that I think maybe some attendees are going to be in, a lot of marketers at growing companies are going to be in. And that is, let's say you've been running marketing for a few months, maybe even a few years now, and you've kind of been doing the activity, like you're on social or you're running a podcast or you've been running some ads, whatever. And you're kind of like, you've got 1 or 2 people in the seat, you've been running for a while, but they're not sure what's working and what's not. And really, they don't know, like if they were asked point blank, is all these efforts profitable? Are they driving more revenue than they're costing for the company? And they don't know the answer to that. Where should they start? This is obviously a big topic, but like, give us some starting points.
So I think there's maybe even starting before, like, is it profitable? I think part of the questions, and one of the things I see a lot is, are you aligned to the goals, right, of the business? And so I think a lot of times marketing, you see everyone talking about like marketing should be measured off of pipeline and revenue and all these sorts of things. But I don't see it in practice a ton, right? And so I think one of the first things you really need to do is align with your CEO or CFO to say like, okay, if our goal is $1 million and we need 4x pipeline coverage, how much of that is responsible to come from marketing and how much is sales driving themselves, right? Because then you can kind of reverse engineer the numbers that you need. So if you're responsible for 50% of that, you can say, okay, cool, we need 2 million in pipeline, which means we need 50 opportunities to hit that at our current close rates, and then back that into a lead number to say we need 300 leads, whatever that might be. Then I think the exercise is, okay, what are we doing today and where is that all coming from? So if we didn't do anything today different, do we have 300 leads coming in the door? And maybe it's like, oh, we only have 200. So now you have the delta of what you need to solve for. And I think the second component of that is understanding um, the metrics of the business. And so you'll have to sit down with kind of the CFO, and this will make the CFO really happy actually when you do this, is say, I want to understand if we're profitable, but I need to better understand like what is profitable for our company, right? Like what is a good acquisition cost for marketing, just on pure marketing spend. Forget about headcount and the fully loaded. Just like when we break it down, and then you can say like, okay, if we acquire new deals at $1,000, that works for us. And so from there, you can say like, okay, one out of every four of our opportunities turns into a deal. So we can spend $250 for an opportunity. Back that down a little bit further. One of every five of our leads turns into an opportunity. We can spend $50 to acquire a lead, right? And then you have a metric you can actually apply to all the stuff you're doing. Because the reality is like, you can get low cost leads. It might convert a lot less. And a lot of times you'll see that, right? Where it's like, we're getting content downloads, but they convert horribly. Well, they're not probably going to convert as high as, organic demo requests. But if they're converting at the right dollar amount, it could still work within your model. And so you really need to understand like the goals that you have and then the model that you're working under to understand like, is something profitable? Is it not? And then also where you have opportunity, because you might look at it and say, man, this one channel is working really well for us. We're getting leads and they're actually converting a lot higher than the other channels. We should start investing more in there. And when you have that conversation with the CFO, usually what happens is the conversation goes exactly there, right? Most companies are willing to fund marketing activities that they know are working. If you can go and tell your CEO, like this program, we want to scale it up and here's why, they'll probably happily give you the budget to go out and do that. That said, not everything in marketing can be measured, right? And so I think part of it is like there are these other holistic activities that kind of go on, like podcasts and things like that are a little bit trickier to measure. So I think one of the exercises you kind of have to get alignment around is not everything is going to be measured, but we can all just kind of agree that doing a podcast and putting it out there is good engagement. It's good marketing. And so some of the stuff you just kind of have to have a leap of faith to say like, I can't directly measure this, but I know podcasts work. I know that we get really good engagement. I know we get good feedback from it. I know our prospects like it. It's when we get it mentioned on sales calls. What's the value of that? I'm not exactly sure. So I think positioning out some of your budget, I think, for those types of activities is a big piece of it, and saying like, this is going to be a little bit unmeasurable.
Yeah, I really like that last point. I've talked to someone, I forget who the exact guest was, but on a prior interview, they were saying exactly that, like reserving a chunk for maybe more like brand focused things or like harder to attribute things. I want to like go back to, so like, I feel like you gave us this perfect like 30,000 foot overview. Going back to, let's say that then, listeners they go to their leadership team and they say, okay, we know what our goal is this year. So it sounds like the first thing is like get the goal, then determine what marketing specifically is responsible for of that goal. And so are they looking to come away? Let's just start there. They're looking to come away with some tangible number, right? It's like whether your company measures MQLs or SQLs or deals or whatever it is, you're walking away with that number. And then you said the first thing you're trying to do is say, if we do nothing different, how much of that are we going to get using our current thing? And what if the answer is we're not sure? Where do they start there then, like with the marketing activities that they're currently doing?
Yeah. So I think if you can't tell what's happening now, then I think it's an operational problem, right? And so attribution is one of those topics that everyone loves to talk about. And I've never seen a company or been at a company or actually had an attribution model where I'm like, oh, this is rock solid. So part of it is like get to 80%, and that's probably amazing. And I think from there, you can start to sort it out, right? So you should be tracking form fills and using UTMs to get people and understanding like what is actually driving conversions on your website. Is it paid traffic? Is it organic traffic? If it is organic, where are they coming from? How are they finding us? And backing into that sort of stuff. So there's probably some exercise and operational stuff you can do to try to figure out where that's coming from. But I would start there.
So then at this point, once we know sort of our goal in marketing, like what's marketing responsible to contribute toward the company's overarching goal. And we know sort of what our baseline's at. So if we don't do anything different, we know that like, so let's work with something like, let's just say to make it even 100 SQLs. So we want to get 100 sales qualified leads by the end of the year, because we know that will convert to roughly X amount of pipeline. And if we figure out that when we actually sit down to measure it, we're probably on track to get 25. like across the course of the year with our current marketing activities.
Yep.
So now where does that extra 75 come from? How are we thinking about like whether like that 25, we could be squeezing a little bit more out of those existing activities? How do you kind of think about that?
Yeah. So I think when you figure out, okay, we need 25, I think one of the things is you can't just measure it across all of marketing to say like we have 25 leads, because every lead is different, right? Like we just talked about, like content leads are different than organic demo requests, and so they convert differently. So I think one of the things in that exercise is you have to understand your conversions almost by channel, so you can understand, okay, if we get 25 leads and they're all content downloads, are they really going to convert all the way through the funnel? And even to SQL, even if they all convert in SQL, you still see different conversion rates all the way through the funnel if you actually track it. And so I think part of it is understanding your channel by channel. And then I think there's some things where you have to figure out what could we be getting more out of and where do we have opportunity. And I think one of the easy ways to do that is looking at, the first place I always start is looking at your current funnel and how do we optimize that, right? And so looking at your demo request page, like what does that funnel look like? Are we making it easy for people? Are we seeing a big drop off from someone requesting a demo and actually getting on a call with us? Okay, what if we put a Calendly link right after the demo form fill so we capture people right away? And so there's lots of tactics and things you can do within any of those channels to try to get more. If you see certain content is resonating, it's like, okay, how do we create more of that content or more types of that content, so we can actually get more people out of it? So I think probably within channel by channel, you can optimize a lot of things to try to get more. And then I think you'd say like, okay, we're gonna get 5 more from here is the goal, 10 more from here, that's the goal. And then I think the other thing is new channels. The new channels are tough because it's all green field if you're an earlier stage startup, because you're likely not doing a lot of those channels today. So when you have the world as options, I think it's a little overwhelming sometimes to be like, what should we be doing? Should we be doing YouTube shorts? Should we be posting on LinkedIn? Should we be doing this? Should we be doing that? And it's almost overwhelming because you can't really do everything, obviously. And you're a smaller team, so you have limited resources. So where you place your bets has to be really precise. So I think one of the frameworks is, rather than making a big bet to say like, this quarter we need to get 75 more leads, our whole strategy revolves around X. Can you test your way into any of those? So what's an MVP version of a way you could test into it? So if you wanted to do a podcast, for example, rather than starting a podcast, record something like this and put it on LinkedIn, or put it up as like just a webinar, or however you want to do it, to see like, is this actually, are people engaging with this at all, right? Before you spend all this time planning out, here's our 20 guests, here's all these sorts of things, and then set some early indicators like, oh, if we can get 30 people registered for our very first one, that would be amazing, and then we could scale it up from there. But if you get 2 people registered and you feel like, okay, I'm not sure what we did wrong and I don't have a plan of how we could get it better, then it's probably move on to the next thing and start testing it. But I think one of the things you have to get comfortable with is the speed and the cycles which you can start testing through, because it is a little bit like you need more at bats to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And once it works, it's like, okay, we're going to move this into our steady state. We're going to start building from there, and then we're going to move and keep testing new channels, new initiatives.
So basically, you see it as like a split between, once you know what you have to go out and get to contribute to the company goal, we're measuring existing channels to know what we're currently doing. If we just put it on cruise control, this is what will come in. If we're not measuring that right now, we get our foundations right. And now we know, just putting it on cruise control, this is what existing channels will get us. Then the other split is new channels. On existing channels, we're going through the existing funnel or we're looking at our entire funnel that those channels are all driving towards. And we're saying, I think you and I chatted about this last time. Like you said, you're an advocate of finding like, where are we lowest and where are we highest? Like where we can look at industry benchmarks, for example, and see, oh, we're outperforming most people here. Let's double down on that. That's our competitive advantage. Or like, this is an area that seems it's way below average, and we could quickly bring this up to speed. Like you said, maybe the conversion rate of people who actually like show up on a sales call from those that book, like, are they losing the link somewhere? Are they maybe like, are we waiting too long to get back to them? Is the booking time too far out? Like if we can reduce the booking time to just 24 hours or something, and increase that from a 40% show rate to like an 80% show rate. So you're going through, I think it's important for people to hear is like, before we get to new channels of how to hit that goal, we're looking at like our existing one and going through each stage. I mean, you get pretty micro with it, like each stage of this funnel and saying like, where can we improve? And then once that's fixed simultaneously, then we're looking over here at some of the new channels.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's easy because in my role now, like we come into companies and I can go in and just look with fresh eyes. I think when you've built out systems and you're internal doing the marketing, you end up kind of like with this little bit of a Frankenstein experience usually because it's changed along the way or whatever might happen. And so I think one of the things I always recommend to people is go in and just fresh eyes kind of look at it and say like, does this make sense? Does this experience suck as an end user, right? If I go to a webinar and I get a generic follow-up email, and we can make that email better. And even when we got 1% of people to convert off of it, we get hundreds of people to our webinars every single month. That would be a huge lift for us, right? So figuring out, I think, with those experiences and just coming at it saying like, if we were to reinvent this, what would it look like? Because you probably have stuff that's working already. But yeah, I think going pretty deep into the existing channels is probably the fastest way to get some of those results.
Now, when we talk about the profitability of marketing, you mentioned kind of two, again, like another sort of fork. One is like evaluating a channel's given profit. So you alluded to like people coming in from a blog, right? Like are going to convert at a different rate than people that are coming in from this other channel, maybe like paid ads or something. And so if you're running 2, 3, 4 channels, those are each going to be different levels of profitability. Probably some close at a higher rate than others, have shorter sales cycles than others and things like that. You also alluded to sort of overall profitability. And this is something I don't want to skip over. I know we maybe don't have time to get super in depth before we like go into the Q&A, but like, what are some of the metrics? I think you mentioned customer acquisition cost. Can you talk a little bit about, for people that maybe don't feel super comfortable with metrics or with some of the mathematics of this, but like want a starting point and want to dive deeper, like where do you recommend they start? And can you give like a 101 primer on it, like CAC or CAC to LTV? Like go back to that conversation where you're talking with the CFO, like what do they need to come away with? Like, hey, how much can we spend to get a lead? How much can we spend to get a deal? How much do these customers pay us back over time? How should marketers be thinking about these things?
So when you think about marketing, right, and the reputation marketers have, it's like, oh, marketers are just spending money, marketers are just doing these things, and there's no accountability. So I wasn't joking when I said like your CFO would love this conversation, because your CFO will love that conversation. So, and I found in my experience, like the CFO to be one of the most helpful people because their business is making sure that the company's profitable. So if their marketing person is coming to them saying like, I want to be completely aligned to the business, that's music to their ears. And so I think saying like, I want to better understand what can we spend to acquire a customer. And then I think from there, you can kind of reverse engineer, okay, what does that mean from spending money on leads? And again, if you look at it by channel and you know the conversion rates, it's not going to be the same across all of your different channels. And so I think that's an important kind of nuance to figure out. But I think starting with like, what does that look like? What does your payback period look like? And understand like, okay, if we acquire a customer for $1,000, our product's $5,000, our CAC to LTV is this 5-to-1 if they stick around for a year, and that's within what the business is shooting for. Amazing. That's kind of green light. And I think one of the things you'll have when you have those conversations is there's probably some metrics and nuance to it that'll get pushed to you where you're like really trying to understand some of these metrics, and you can have a much cleaner conversation with people, with the CFO, and you'll get a lot more interest and willingness to invest because I think, everyone has kind of seen those types of memes where it's like, we just launched a campaign, where are our leads? And I think part of it is we're not doing a good job educating on things that maybe aren't going to drive sales leads and what are going to drive sales leads and the difference there. So I think starting with that conversation with the CFO is really, really important. And then mapping out that funnel and working with that person to say like, okay, here's the model, here's the spend levels we're going to be at. And if there is a gap, we need more money. This channel is already working well for us. So can we get more funds to invest in this? Because that'll get us 50 more leads. And then we'd be at our goal if we can invest it there. And so I think aligning those activities is super important.
So the goal here then is your goal with, in your example, like the meeting with the CFO that will, make them extremely happy is you're kind of learning, doing the math either on your own if no one's figured this out. If like I know I've been at smaller companies where like no one's really figured this out, so
Yep.
you can look up like what CAC to LTV would need to be, right? Like what do we need? What does a customer pay us over the course of 6 months or a year or whatever? And so how much can we afford to acquire them for? Or this is a ready-made answer that you're getting from your leadership team. And then your job basically there is then you're moving into what you're talking about here, which is like measuring the profit of each channel. Like when we really trace it through beginning to end, not just cost per click of Google ads or like, conversion rate of the landing page or whatever, but all the way through when we follow the deals all the way down to who actually closes, this is how much it actually is costing us to acquire a deal. And as long as it's under that amount, we can kind of run it.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And I think you probably get more investment if you're under that, because most like startup SaaS companies are trying to scale at extremely fast rates. And so if you can identify a channel and say, this is working for us and it's within the metrics of our business, can we invest more? I've never had a CFO say no. They might say like, yeah, let's invest $5,000 more this month. And then if it's still working, okay, 10,000, okay, 20,000, and keep kind of pushing it until it stopped working. I think that's an easy kind of way to go about getting more investments for the programs that are working. And something else kind of magical happens in that process when you go through that exercise is you get way more invested in the sales side of what's happening. So you might look at it and say like, man, why are these webinar leads not converting at all? What does the sales process and sales follow-up look like? And you might start digging in there to say, why are these only converting at 5% and all of our other ones are at 20%? And then you see, oh, well, we're not following up with them, in, like you said, in 3 days after, or the follow-ups are horrible. So then suddenly it's like, well, that's impacting my number as a marketer and my programs as a marketer because they're not ultimately converting the revenue. And so when you start looking at it that way, you get way more invested and get way more aligned with sales. And I think from a sales leadership standpoint, working with tons of sales leaders, they actually appreciate those conversations and say like, hey, we're passing these leads over. If they are good quality and we're looking at it, why are these not converting? Here's some ideas of maybe how we can help. And it's not necessarily the marketer's job, but like you said, maybe we limit the booking window to 7 days out on a demo request. Maybe marketing funds, hey, let's send prospects a Starbucks gift card the morning of a demo to try to increase the show rate. And so things like that, you start investing in and you start realizing these will actually help my number, even though I don't feel like marketing, it feels like more sales enablement type of activities. But you have a kind of vested interest in all of those converting as far down the funnel as possible.
Yeah, I think there's something to like everyone focusing around revenue that sort of solves those like what can be like conflicts, because then you're not advocating that like, well, we're doing our part, but you're not doing your part, or vice versa. Instead, it's like, well, no, we all want revenue. Like the company set this revenue goal. This is the role that sales plays, this is the role that marketing plays. And then, like you said, it sort of forces that alignment there because it's like, oh, okay, like maybe it does seem like you're doing everything right. You are like responding within 24 hours. Like maybe we need to switch up the channel. Like we see other channels are converting at a better rate. Maybe this channel we need to stop running on, or, hey, like there are some changes that sales needs to make. So it does feel like it brings a lot of that alignment.
Yeah.
One thing I want to touch on before we move past this so we've talked, about like the need to measure from start to finish what it looks like for each channel to go through and close. Like we just did this recently with our blog, right? So like we've started a foray into paid, and then we're doing it from like our blog content and things like that, all the way through to sign up, or for us, like product qualified lead, like PQL. But then you also mentioned like, okay, in order to like, in our example, if our goal is 100 sales qualified leads and we're going to get 25 through our existing channels, this is this sort of open creative world into new channel land of we need 75. Which ones are going to be the ones to do it? I like this idea, or I like what you started to lead with, which is building an MVP. And we often talk about like the value of or how certain leading indicators can get a bad rap for being like vanity metrics. But in reality, if you view like leading metrics and lagging, or like leading indicators and lagging indicators, or that these are good early signals of like, oh, okay, like, hey, we got 1,000 impressions on that. The right people are seeing it. And now let's give it a little bit of time. And now let's see who comes to the website as a result of it. I'm curious for your take on how long, like for listeners, how long do you sort of give? It's like all channel dependent, so there's no perfect answer. But when you are trying to find the new channels to unlock to get that remaining 75, How long do you give a channel? What do you look for? Do you think that's the right way to think about it? Leading indicators, lagging
Yep.
indicators?
Yeah, I don't think any metric is a bad metric. It depends how you use it. If you're using a leading indicator as like success, it's a bad metric just because you're using it the wrong way. But to your point, if I'm launching an AdWords campaign and I'm targeting whatever specific keyword, then I think saying like, okay, I'm going to give this 2 weeks and we're going to spend $5,000 on this test over 2 weeks. At the end of that 2 weeks, if you now know your model and you know we need to be under $500 a lead and you're at $1,500 a lead at 2 weeks, and you're like, I have some minor improvements on how to tweak this or improve it, but we're still so far off. I don't see a path where we're going to get to the $500. So that might be one where it's like, okay, kill this. If you're at 750, it's like, hey, we're not that far off from the 500. I think if we refine the targeting and we're getting some junk from these states and we're going to remove those and we're going to do day parting so that we're only running during the week because the weekend ones don't convert as much. And I think these are the 5 things we can do to change it. We're not going to be that far off. And again, I think that's a much more powerful message to send back up to leadership to say, we're not that far off. There's no need to panic. Yes, it's over where we need to be, but here's the things we're going to do to improve it. And if you have a plan and then you do those things and you're still not there, then maybe you revisit again, what are the other things we could do to try to get there? But I think that's kind of the path I would take for any channel, is like set those metrics of where you want to be and where you know you need to be. And then use those leading indicators to say, are we even close here? And then what's the strategy for improving it? If you're like, I don't know how we could really improve this, then just adding more to it or continuing to do it and hoping that it's going to improve magically is not really the solution. I think another thing that comes up a lot is like, okay, well, what channels do we initially bet on? Like, what are those initial bets that we should be placing? One of the easier ways to kind of think about it or look at it is look at people who are maybe in your space that are a little bit further along than you, and what are the channels they're investing in? Because chances are they've probably figured out the same exercise that you're going through right now and figured out like, oh, LinkedIn is a channel for us, right? If all your competitors are posting on LinkedIn and running ads on LinkedIn, there's probably something to that. Now, I think the only caveat I'll give there is every business is very different. They might be okay spending $1,500 a lead on LinkedIn because they have an organic engine that drives 5,000 signups for them a month, so they can eat that cost and it still works in their whole model. So there is some nuance there, but I think like it's a good signal at least to say, is the audience there? Are people engaging and converting? And if all your competitors are there, the answer is probably yes.
Is there a number of channels you recommend trying at the same time? Like, I can imagine growth is the goal, right? And we want to get there fast. So have you seen a sort of law of diminishing returns of like, you wouldn't encourage any, it feels like you could run a couple of these experiments at the same time, right? We could try our first podcast episode. We try maybe 4 episodes for 1 month, look at the leading indicators, look at some of the lagging, then make a decision. In the meantime, can we try YouTube? Can we try LinkedIn ads? Can we do some of these things simultaneously? Or at what point are we maybe taking our eye off the ball and we're not going to really be getting a good read for these things?
I think like no more than 3 new things usually is kind of the rule I go with. And that's based off of nothing outside of just like, it feels like a lot more. And I think to your point, it starts to feel like we have so many distractions. And I think one of the things when you run these tests is you want to make sure you're actually giving it the best chance to succeed. And so I'm not a farmer, and I don't have anyone in my family who's a farmer, but the analogy someone once said was like, farmers don't go out and plant basically the entire field. They do it in sections, right? And so I think part of it is like, you want to get this section growing and healthy and then move on to the next one and move on to the next one. And so I think that's the way I would go about doing it. I think the one other thing I will mention is the more you can get your channels to play off of each other and be more omni-channel, the better. So if we're going to run, LinkedIn thought leadership ads and do these kinds of things, well, how do we associate that with what the sales team is already doing? So they have tier 1 and tier 2 accounts, and maybe that's our targeting list that we go after, because we know sales is already doing outreach to them. We know that sales is, calling them, emailing them. So we want them to be seeing our leadership ads or thought leadership ads on LinkedIn. And so then I think those will perform a lot better because you're hitting them from a couple different spots versus just a one-off type of channel. Or if you're doing a podcast, how do you repurpose that into your YouTube channel, right? So I think not trying to do everything as a complete standalone from start to finish and thinking how does one play off the other also helps you just go a little bit faster.
This is so critical because it's funny, like my mind is thinking as you're going through all these examples, like, yeah, there's just endless. You really do have to give it the right amount of attention before you write it off as a failed experiment. And I think that it probably happens more often than not, where something is sort of concluded as like it doesn't work because we took like the generic vanilla standard approach and we tried it for a month or whatever and it didn't work. But like literally what you're saying, people would hear, oh, I tried LinkedIn ads. I don't know how my competitors are running them, but they don't work. But it's like, yeah, but are you doing, like, maybe your competitors aren't doing straight ads and trying to drive direct conversion. Maybe they're doing retargeting and they're doing 3 types of ad creative to tell customer stories or reinforce a point of view or whatever. And that ends up being a lot more cost efficient for them down the road. Like they're focused on impression based ads and getting the right message out there than driving people like who are hopefully in market directly to the website and purchasing today. So like there's so many angles you could take it on, even organic stuff or stuff that's considered like what we're doing with content. We've changed the scope of this podcast like 3 times based on like where we're seeing like things going business wise. So I just think there's like so much experimentation. Each channel really needs like proper due diligence and focus before you write it off as like it's not going to get us there.
And I think the other thing when you're testing new channels, a lot of times they don't work because of the creative. So if you look at like what you're actually doing and you look at your LinkedIn ads, I gave this presentation at SaaStock last year. And what I did was I showed all the ABM players in the space and showed their ads all on one screen. They all look exactly the same. So it's like literally the same blue, the same type of stock images, the same value props, the same everything. And I think marketers sometimes forget that marketing is not just about putting an ad live onto a channel. The creative still has to really resonate with someone. And I think one of the things I see too often is people just rolling out very stock, vanilla, hey, get a demo type of things. And it's not very creative in the approach. And if you think about it from your own perspective and think about what you engage with and the companies maybe you engage with, it's probably not the vanilla generic content that everyone else is doing. And so part of it is, I think when you do these experiments is make sure you're at least peppering in like 1 or 2 pieces of it that are maybe swings in terms of the creative you're using, the messaging you're using, that's just a little bit different. And the example I give is like when we were at G2, one of the ads we ran was just a shot we took at someone at their desk, just at the computer, like looking at the thing. And there was no copy to the ad. It was the image. And this is before like selfies became everything, all the rage on LinkedIn. So people would always stop on the ad to look at it, be like, who is this person, right? And then it's like, now they're engaging with the ad. And so the goal of the image is to get someone to stop scrolling. And everyone, next time you're on your phone, you'll realize how good you are at seeing an ad and going right past it. Like you scroll past thousands of ads on a daily basis and probably don't even realize it. And you don't even think twice. And so the image is meant to get them to stop. The copy is meant to compel them to click on to go to the landing page. The landing page is meant to get them to convert. And so I think thinking through each piece, it's not just about we put ads on LinkedIn and we're running them. And you really have to think through the creative and how do we do it in a way that's compelling. And if it's not compelling to you as the marketer, is it really going to be that compelling to the buyer?
Let me ask you 2 more questions, Adam. Attribution. I know I'm going to be pressing you for like a short take here, but I see this all over LinkedIn now. I feel like the conversation in marketing has so moved to like centered around attribution over the past like year or 2. I know there's multiple models. Like, do you give all the weight to like the first channel they came in on or the last touch or sprinkle it all to the middle? For most marketing teams, do you have any advice on this, on how to think about attribution and like just weighing what's important? Like in general, do you consider every touch point or in like channel that's impactful to them in the journey as equal? Like where do you think attribution and modeling it or measuring it comes into play in profitability?
I think one of the big problems is everyone tries to over-engineer it, especially right out of the gate. So if you're not really doing a ton of attribution right now, I think just looking at like first touch, last touch will get you a lot of the story that you're looking for. And I think a lot of times people are like, well, we need to understand how people are engaging with our content or doing this, or they click on this email. And the reality is it going to change the way you're marketing or change the way you're behaving? And if it's the answer is no, it's like, do we really need to know that data? And I think part of it is like just a leap of faith of like, yes, if we're putting out content that's good and people are engaging with it, amazing. And we can look and say like, okay, of the people who turned into opportunities, how many of them engage with our content? Or even I think post opportunity creation is saying, looking at it and saying like, hey, how do we measure content? And looking at it and saying like, hey, of the people who became opportunities, sales is leveraging our content in those discussions. And about 60% of the people who close one engage with some of our content after they become an opportunity. Well, that's valuable to us. But I would say like don't over engineer an attribution model, because I can see too many marketers spend so much time trying to figure out what's working in that very like we need to see every touch point, that it almost becomes their full-time job is just measuring what's working. And it's like, let's just get more marketing out into the world and not over-engineer or overthink it. And so I think comes a time, a point of sophistication of a company where you do get way more granular. But I would say like for earlier stage companies, I would not over-engineer the kind of attribution model.
That's why I go to you, because you keep things simple. And I think on our last conversation, I said, what is advice for people who haven't started this journey yet? And you just said, pick like 3 of these metrics we talked about, and like this week, just go measure them. That's it. Like just start really, really simple, because people can feel like if they have to do all of this at once, it can feel really overwhelming. And instead, I feel like good homework is like, if you don't know how much you're allowed to spend to get a customer profitably, like go figure out your CAC to LTV, go have this conversation with your CFO, like you said, or if you don't know what results, like how many deals or signups or upgraded paying customers your existing efforts are driving, go start there. And then you can sort of like go through the rest of these things and testing new channels.
Yeah, if you do those 2 things that you're not doing today, you're so much better off, in 2 weeks' time, a month's time. And then you can start saying like, okay, now we want to understand how content's playing a role, or now we want to understand like people aren't converting on these thought leadership ads, but of the companies we're serving them to, let's say you split it to say like, okay, of our tier 1, tier 2 accounts, 50% we're going to do air cover ads on and 50% we're not. Then, in 2 months' time, you might say like, let's look at the conversion rates into opportunities of those accounts, and are we having a lift there or not? But I don't think you have to start there and build out this like crazy attribution model. Those things get layered in over time.
Cool. Let's jump to some Q&A. So again, if you haven't, you're welcome to ask any questions. You like make this as applicable and specific to your use case. Adam works very closely with SaaS, but he's very smart. So he'll be able to speak to agency life and other things as well to the best of his ability, not putting you under too much pressure. But let's start with, I've got a couple questions here. So let's start with this one. Apologies if I'm not pronouncing this right. Is it Vaza? Asks or just says, let's talk more about targeting. Do you want to unmute yourself, Vaza? And do you have a specific question about targeting? That is a good point. We didn't talk about like, there are certain personas that are going to be more profitable, or like how defining your ICP, like your ideal customer profile, comes into play in this, and that like targeting the right people might yield you way more profitable customers than like the wrong fit customers. So do you have any follow-up you want to talk about there, Vaza?
No, like how we can find like our ideal customer, how we can target on different paid media channel, and like, yeah, how we can target right audience. Like if you have any tricks or tips or methods, it would be great if you can share. Thank you.
Yeah, I think when I think of targeting, and again, I don't know how accurate the stat is, but I'm sure everyone's seen it, of the 95% of people aren't in market to buy your software and 5% are, whether that's 95 or 85 or 80. I think thinking that way though is very helpful, because it does kind of split your marketing efforts a little bit. You talked about like running demo ads on LinkedIn. It's like, if you're just blindly going after your ICP, like tell the VP of marketing, and so I'm just at SaaS companies and I'm just going to run these demo request ads at this audience. Well, if there's 100 people in that audience that I'm going after and I have $100, I'm spending $1 on every single person to put this offer in front of them. Well, if 95% of them just bought HubSpot a month or two ago, and they're in a year-long contract, I'm wasting 95 of my dollars putting ads in front of them that they're not going to engage with. And so I think one of the things I think to try to get to is, how do you identify maybe people who are in market? And that's where I think like some of the intent data And I know intent data is kind of all over the place depending, and everyone calls everything intent data these days. But I think trying to figure out like, are there good intent signals, whether it be G2 intent, whether it be hiring signals, maybe where they're hiring a VP of ops. So that would be a good indicator, whether it's adjacent technology. So you could use like a purple sonar or something like that to try to figure out like, what technology is this company using? When did they install it potentially? One of the plays we were in at Help Scout was we looked at people's websites and we used Purple Sonar to scrape basically who had Zendesk, but also who installed the Zendesk pixel or tag on their site 9 months ago, because they're coming up for renewal in 3 months. So that's a good audience for us to put those types of offers in front of. And then I think the other bucket of people is they're not going to convert right away. That's not to say they won't ever convert, but I think that's where some of the brand stuff, some of the content, podcasts, that's where that becomes super valuable, where people just start engaging more and more with their company. And the example I used to give was like, if you were to buy a call recorder, like, which ones would you shortlist? And everyone always says like Gong. Well, it's not because they've ever used Gong before. It's just because they see Gong's content and thought leadership all over the place, and it's like the standard name, right? The same thing with Drift before with chatbots. So I think like building that brand and doing those things go a long way. So when it is time to make a decision, you're quickly on the short list of companies they're considering. So, and from targeting standpoint, I think splitting the audience a lot, and I think really trying to figure out what are the signals that maybe someone would be buying, and how do you try to like act upon those things.
I'll add from a different perspective, as I'm not sure if this is helpful, but I feel like one of the things in my experience that has helped with like starting a short list of who, like if this is not an exercise you've done, you don't know who your best customer is. One of the resources I'd recommend, it's a positioning research or resource, but April Dunford's book on positioning has been really helpful to me. So I ran this exercise at an agency when I ran marketing there like a few years ago. And then we recently did it at Databox. And basically she walks you through this framework. Go listen to her podcast and read her book for the details. But basically it's like, determine what makes a best customer to you. So it could be like for us, we looked at like, okay, who paid above average, who was on the higher, April Dunford. April Dunford was her name. Basically, like we looked at, okay, who's on higher tier plans, who pays us more than average. Then we set things like who retained a long time. So if average customers churn an X amount, who retained maybe 12 months beyond that. And we just made a list, like not anything crazy. You don't want to like over engineer, but just like what makes a good customer to you. And you know, in the course of your business, chances are that if you've been around for any length of time, you've got better customers and more average customers. And so when you start to really dive in and find out people that are staying extra long, they're retaining longer, they're paying you above average, what we did that was really helpful was you come away with two things. One, you make a short list of firmographic qualities. So like you look for any common trends or abnormalities that catch your eye. So for example, oh, interesting, it's all schools, like, or it's schools and banks. Like we serve all these customers, but when we look at the ones that have stuck around for 3 years, not 1 year, and pay us $100 a month more than average, or $1,000 a month more than average, or they close in half the amount of time, they're all from this one industry, or they're smaller businesses where the other ones are bigger. Like, so look at company size, look at industry, look at the job title of the person who bought from you, and see if there's any commonalities there. And look at those firmographically. Then what was really killer was we got on the phone with 20 of them. And April will walk you through how to conduct these interviews. You can email me at jeremiah@databox.com. I'll send you our write-up of what we did. You can follow what we did. Basically, you walk through this like short 20-minute interview, and it gets at like, why did they choose you above everyone else? Like, and you start to identify like, oh, there was this like one feature we have that we thought was average, but is a game changer in the education space, or like they're using it for this thing we didn't realize. And what you'll quickly realize is you can come away with a short list of either firmographic things that make your best customer or qualitative things that make your best customer. It might not be a standard industry or company size, but it might be people that really want blank or really value X. Or for Databox, we're not much value to you if you only have like 2 tools to integrate. But if you have like 5, 10 plus pieces of software that you want to view in one place, all of a sudden we're more valuable to you. And then that would refine some of your targeting.
It's so funny you mentioned that, because when I was at Help Scout, we brought in April to do a workshop.
Oh, no way.
Just that. And one of the verticals that came out of that was education. And so Help Scout is a help desk software built for SaaS companies. We had all these education companies, and when we dug into it, they're using it for like a bursar's office and all these sorts of like individual use cases where they need like a shared inbox. It's like, oh wow, we never even thought about that really as like the primary use case. And so we spun up a landing page that didn't talk about like support tickets and didn't talk about customers. We talked about students. We talked about these things, right? And so you can take that exercise and then feed that into your marketing to make it really resonate too, right? Because I think if you're going out with the same generic message, it's not going to resonate with that audience. But suddenly, if I have a landing page where I'm showing Harvard and BU and all these schools that are using the platform, it's way more likely I'm going to be able to get more of them. And so I also think that's a much more compelling test that people will probably be interested in funding. Say like, hey, education stays on for 50% longer and pay us 30% more. So we want to spin up this campaign, get alignment with sales around it. And I think like then you're very focused in terms of what you're doing.
Love it. That's such a good example. Kathy, this is a great, thank you. Outstanding information, helpful thinking, so timely. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for coming. Hope it's helpful. Steve, you asked, are we going to talk about how Databox can help with our marketing tasks? That's not a plant, I promise. The purpose of this is really just like to bring value and education to your business, but definitely are happy to talk about that. I'll give you like the 10-second pitch, but if you DM Maria your email, me or someone from the team will send you like a tailored email and we can go back and forth and help you with that. So I'll send you an email on how we can help you with all the marketing tasks specifically. In general, once you've got all your softwares, so in marketing, you've got CRM, ad platforms, you've got probably product data if you're a SaaS company, you've got spreadsheets tracking things that your software can't track. So in essence, you can use data or Databox to centralize, visualize, report, and analyze all that stuff in one place. So you can connect all the software that you're using, and then you can actually create these metrics using Databox that Adam's talking about. So everything Adam walked you through, like the typical way without a software that people do this is they go open up all their ad platforms and they copy and paste their numbers into a spreadsheet. And he's laughing because I'm sure he's seen this. And like they copy and paste their numbers and their ad performance and they have to manually update it every week or every month. And they try and calculate it all out. With Databox, you can sync all those platforms into one place, and then you can create custom metrics. Like you can build a metric called CAC, customer acquisition cost, or CAC to LTV. And as those numbers come in your platforms, these metrics that you need to keep an eye on will update in real time. And then you can have those metrics ping your marketing Slack channel every week or every month to keep your team aware of what's going on. You can set goals around them. You can create dashboards to show like how marketing and sales are working side by side to show your CFO. There's all kinds of stuff you can do. So I don't feel like that was a great elevator pitch. That was a test of my ability to do that spur of the moment. But DM Maria your email and we'll get you more information. Now it's VP to VP, Adam. Heather asks, how have you found success in conversations with the CFO to fund brand initiatives that may have a less clearly measurable impact today? Said differently, how do you approach balancing investment in short-term versus long-term initiatives?
I think part of what you have to do, you can't go initiative by initiative, because I think part of it is like they won't fully ever get it. And so I think you want to have the space to play around with. And so I think part of what you need to do is just have the conversation early to say, 80% of our budget is going to go into these demand gen activities. 20% we want to use for brand, or 30%, whatever the percentage is, and building towards kind of the future for, in a year from now, we have this podcast where we have all this engagement and we can tap into it, or we have this community. And so we're going to do things within that budget. We're going to test a lot. We're going to try things that are more brand focused type of activities that a lot of them might not work. And that's okay, right? So it's almost like setting it up to be like, don't worry about this, the other 80%. And I think you get that alignment up front, and then you just have a lot more wiggle room versus like, you don't want to be going every month to say like, hey, here's 5 new things we want to try on the brand side, right? And because the immediate question is like, okay, what's going to be the result of that? Or, okay, why don't you just take that money and put it into Google Ads instead? And I think part of that conversation if you ask them themselves, like, well, what was the last piece of software you bought? Or like, I always use the Gong example. Say like, if you were going to buy, this tool, which ones would you put? And they always say like, they'll give you the answer. And it's like, okay, that's exactly why we need to invest in brand, right? Because you've never used the tool, but you know of the company and you've just put it on the list. And so part of the activities we need to do are to build that, because the impact of that long term is way better for your CAC and LTV, because you would just have an inbound flow that you're not paying money for. Whereas Google, LinkedIn, you're on the hamster wheel. Once you get off and you stop spending, you stop seeing results. And they're a lot more volatile too. There's tons of companies we work with and we see where it's like, man, spend spiked this month, or cost per lead doubled out of nowhere. Is there a new competitor in the space? Is someone just spending a ton of money here, or just competing with so many different variables that are out of your control? And so usually I think just getting the buy-in on the concept of that early on, and then you just have the wiggle room to do what you want with that 20%.
One thing too, I would add for listeners, this is something everyone, it feels like, is talking about on LinkedIn right now, if you're scrolling your feed. But a lot of people are talking about tracking this like self-reported attribution, right? Just asking people how you heard about us. I can kind of speak from like two sides of that, of like the good and the bad. Like it definitely, it's just as, I don't know if just as the right word, but it's imperfect, like any measurement model is. And that's why I think Adam's answer is like foundationally the right thing, of like, this is how Drift is another example. Like, what chat tools do you know? If Intercom and Drift aren't like number one in your mind, they'll make the short list for most people simply because of that. But like one example for us was on the challenging side, like if we could pool the email addresses of everyone who's listens to the podcast, for example, I'm sure we would find that there's a lot of crossover in our CRM, and like, did it drive more than that, whatever. When we do ask how they heard about us and cite it, if people put the podcast or metrics and chill. But here's the thing. A lot of our effort goes from piecing this up. Like, I'm going to summarize this episode and Move the Needle, our brand newsletter, which you all should subscribe for. And I'm going to summarize it there. And so the podcast is fueling the newsletter. Maybe the newsletter's driving it, or it's funneling like 10 times the posts it would have for our CEO, Pete, who posts on LinkedIn, or for me. And then that might've been where people come across Databox and they hit the follow button on Pete. So it's very imperfect, but a good example of like ways to take a stab at it is to ask how people heard about you. The other thing was doing like, I've never used this tool. This isn't my area of expertise, but I know there are ways to automate keyword searches in tools like Gong or Avoma. And our sales rep one time pinged the Slack channel and said, hey, someone shouted out metrics and chill is how they heard about you. And I would have never known if they didn't tell me that. So if we would set up an automation in like our call recording software, every time someone says podcast, you could train your sales team to ask the question, how did you hear about us? Have your sales recording software make that be the trigger, and then record the answer, and you'll get a little bit more answers. But at the end of the day, there does have to be conviction around it, because I know we're not perfectly measuring every attribute.
And even that's imperfect, right? Because I think, like you said, if I say, I heard about the podcast, well, the reality is like, I may have been following Pete for 5 years on LinkedIn and seen his posts and never really connected. And I listened to one of your podcasts and then I see an ad and I convert on it. And I'm like, oh, I listen to the podcast. But so there's a lot of imperfection in measuring that. But I think you're spot on in terms of that you just have to believe in the concept. And I think part of it is like, that's a good way to try to measure it. But also you just have to kind of fundamentally believe that this is the way people buy. That, this is the way people hear about companies. This is the way people engage, across all your different social media. Because I get the same thing. I'll get on a call with someone and they'll say, like, oh, how did you hear about me? And it'll be like, oh, I listened to this podcast. And it's like a 3-year-old podcast. It's a weird experience. You're like, oh, wow. Okay. And, how do you measure the ROI of that? So, if someone in 3 years from now mentions this podcast, it's like, oh, well, this was definitely worth an hour of my time to get on.
Yeah, 100%.
Just fundamentally believe it's worth it no matter what, because I think like I'm just a believer, and that's how people buy. And if you have a doubt about that, or if your CFO has doubt about that, I think asking the question of, well, how do you buy? You usually get the answer of exactly how everyone buys.
100%. Adam, this has been awesome. I can't thank you enough for being the very first flagship episode. I feel like it's so fitting that it was you for Metrics and Chill Live. It's been a lot of fun. Where can people, if they want to can they consult with you, hire you? Like, how can people work with you who listen and are like, this is a smart guy, I want to work with him?
Yeah, if you're interested in working with us, you can go to growthunion.co. You can book some time with me directly on there. You can follow me on LinkedIn or ping me there as well.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for coming. The next session will be in a couple weeks. Again, you'll all be sent the brand newsletter, and we announce these new upcoming live episodes. And if you decide to come, you can ask questions. And if not, we'll summarize it on social and through email. So thanks again, Adam, for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use Databox to simplify and automate some of the steps in Adam's playbook. We'll cover how to set and track company-wide goals and team goals, how to use forecasts to see how you'd perform if nothing changes, how to build a funnel to track conversion rate by stage, how to create custom metrics like customer acquisition cost or customer lifetime value to stay profitable, and how to build dashboards to help you test new channels by tracking leading and lagging metrics. To help with this, I'll be using very simple scenarios with simple numbers to break these ideas down into more actionable steps in Databox. Feel free to apply these concepts to your own unique situation. Adam first talks about aligning around company goals, so let's start with that. Imagine we had a meeting with our CEO and we aligned on the goal of $500,000 of new annual recurring revenue this year. We know our marketing team is responsible for generating 25% of the pipeline, so from there, we worked our way backwards to figure out how many customers we had to generate. Let's say we figured out that number is 30 customers. Using historical data, you could look back and see what you did in the past months or quarters to know that if we keep everything the same, we typically generate around 15 customers. Another option would be to use a tool like Forecasts to help us. So in Databox, let's go ahead and navigate to Forecasts. You can see here I already created a forecast for customers, so we'll have about 14 customers this year. We can also click under View Details to get a bit more information on this forecast. And if we wanted to make any updates, like include seasonality or holidays, we could do that as well and apply those settings. But let's just keep this as is for now. And for simplicity, let's just round this number to 15 customers. So our goal is to generate 15 more customers by the end of this year. Now that we know that we want to generate 15 more customers, we can use the goals feature in Databox to track both company and team goals and track our progress towards them. Here you can see I've already created our goals for $500,000 of annual recurring revenue and the total 30 customers we need for marketing this year. Another tip in Adam's playbook is to look at our existing funnel to find areas we can improve to help make up the gap between what we'll end up with and what we need. To do that, we can use data boards. I've already created my data board, so let's see how I built that. Okay, so here's my marketing funnel. To build something like this, you would just drag and drop either the pipeline or funnel visualization to your data board canvas and select the metrics that you would want for each stage. For me, I added sessions, new leads, and customers. The visualization will then automatically calculate the conversion rate for each stage of this funnel. Adam also talked about knowing how much you can spend to profitably acquire a new customer using metrics like customer acquisition cost and lifetime value. Once we know these numbers, we can track it for new channels we want to invest in to make sure we're not spending too much to get a new customer. He advised syncing with your CFO or revenue leader to come up with a firm number for this. In our simple example, let's start by creating a metric for lifetime value, LTV. This metric estimates the total revenue our company can expect from a single customer account throughout their entire relationship with our business. So let's say in our example, that's $10,000. Adam recommended aiming at a CAC to LTV ratio of 1:3, which would mean we could spend up to $3,333 to acquire a new customer from our new channel. That means we need to track another metric, CAC, and make sure that it's below that number. The formula for CAC is total marketing and sales cost divided by the number of new customers acquired. So let's say we've never run paid ads before and we want to test a channel like Google Ads. First, we'd set up tracking to make sure we know how many customers we're driving from our ads by defining what counts as a conversion. For example, a purchase, a sign up, or a lead. To track this, you can use out-of-the-box metrics from Google Ads like conversions. For this example, I've already defined a conversion as a lead generated from the ads program. Now, to create our customer acquisition cost metric, we can use data calculations in Databox. Now that we know our calculation, this will be super easy to set up because the feature mimics an equation format. So I would just choose cost as variable A. And for variable C, I would choose customers. And here we can see that our CAC is $3,000, which is safely below our limit. So we can also just name this CAC and press save. Lastly, Adam mentioned the value of tracking a few leading and lagging indicators for this new channel to get a sense of how it's performing early on and what results it will generate. To do that, we can use data boards. I've already created a data board to help us track our Google Ads campaigns. Here you can see I've separated it into two sections. I have my leading indicators and my lagging indicators. For my leading indicators, I'm tracking impressions and clicks. And for my lagging indicators, I'm tracking conversions, LTV, CAC to LTV ratio, and CAC. We can then use this dashboard to track our Google Ads campaign and make sure we should keep investing in this channel. I hope this helped you learn a few ways you can use Databox to help you execute Adam's playbook. If you want to dive deeper, check out Databox 101 to learn more ways it can help you make better decisions and improve your company's performance.